Maya Williams had been clearing tables at Kasparov's Grill since 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It was a Friday. Atlanta's Buckhead district hummed outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of neighborhood where the cars were German and the silence cost money. Inside Kasparov's, everything was dark wood and low lighting and the particular quiet of a restaurant where the menu had no prices. Where the staff moved like shadows because that's what shadows were expected to do. Maya moved like a shadow. 16 years old. 5'4" in her regulation non-slip shoes. Wearing the white-collared uniform that Svetlana, the floor manager, had told her must always be pressed and spotless. Her hair was pulled back the way she'd learned to pull it, tight, neat, unobtrusive. She carried a tray that was slightly too heavy for her frame, and she carried it without complaint because that was the job and the job was not optional. Her brother Devin's albuterol inhaler cost $67 without insurance. The electricity bill was overdue by 11 days. She had a calculus exam on Monday that she hadn't finished studying for because she'd been here every evening this week. Nobody at Kasparov's knew any of that. Nobody needed to know. She was the busgirl. She cleared plates and refilled water and moved between tables like furniture rearranged itself when she passed. The guests never looked at her. The guests never looked at anyone who worked here unless something was wrong. That was fine. Invisible had its advantages. Nobody knew she spoke Russian. Her mother had grown up in Virginia, the daughter of a university professor who had fallen in love with the Russian language long before she fell in love with anyone else. She had studied linguistics at Georgetown, earned a Ph.D., taught at Georgia State, and raised her daughter in 2 languages simultaneously, English for the world and Russian for the 2 of them, a private frequency that nobody else in their orbit could tune into. Maya's mother had passed that frequency to her daughter before the illness took her 18 months ago. The Russian had been their private world. Bedtime stories. Whispered jokes nobody else in the room understood. An entire secret frequency that ran beneath their daily lives like a current. Now her mother was gone. And the language was all Maya had left of her. She thought about this sometimes while she cleared tables. She was thinking about it now, reaching across a foretop to collect a wine glass, moving toward the kitchen, entirely invisible, when she passed table 11. 2 men. She knew them the way she knew all the regulars. Oleg and Pavel. They came every Friday, ate little, drank less, spoke quietly to each other and not at all to the staff. They always requested the private corner of the dining room, the curved booth where the angle of the wall meant you couldn't quite see them from the host stand. They had been Nikolai Baranov's men for years. Maya knew this the way she knew everything about Kasparov's, through observation, through the invisible girl's education of watching people who didn't know they were being watched. She was 3 steps past their table when she heard it. Not the words themselves. Not at first. Just the cadence of the language, the particular music of it, rising through the ambient noise of the restaurant like a note she'd been trained since birth to recognize. Her feet slowed without her telling them to. She kept moving. Kept her face neutral. Carried her tray toward the kitchen pass. But her ears stayed behind. And in the 5 seconds it took to cross the remaining distance to the kitchen door, Maya Williams heard 4 words in her dead mother's language that stopped the blood in her veins. After the dessert service, she pushed through the kitchen door. Set her tray down. Stood very still. Because she'd heard the rest of it too. Not just those 4 words. The full sentence. The breath before the full sentence. The quiet, matter-of-fact tone of 2 professionals discussing logistics over untouched food. She'd heard every syllable with the perfect clarity of someone who had grown up listening to this language in the dark, in the intimate space between a mother and a child where nothing was background noise. She understood what came after the dessert service. She turned and looked through the kitchen's small porthole window at the dining room. Oleg and Pavel at their curved booth. Their plates barely touched. Their heads inclined together. And across the restaurant, at the private corner table he occupied every single Friday from 8:30 until exactly 10 o'clock, Nikolai Baranov. 44 years old. Russian-born. He'd come to Atlanta in 2004 with a single suitcase and a name that nobody in the city could pronounce yet. He had built Kasparov's first, then the property company, then the hospitality group, then the construction arm that had quietly reshaped 6 square blocks of Buckhead over the last decade. He sat now in an immaculate gray suit, his phone face down on the table, eating alone the way he always ate alone, without pleasure, without hurry, as though eating were simply another obligation to be discharged with precision. He had no idea. No idea that his own men were sitting 40 feet away, speaking Russian in a restaurant full of people who didn't understand Russian, calmly confirming the details of a plan to end him before he reached his car. No idea that the only person in the building who understood every word they were saying was a 16-year-old busgirl standing at the kitchen porthole with a tray in her hands and $67 on her mind. Maya looked at the clock on the kitchen wall. 8:49 p.m. The dessert service went out at 9:15. 26 minutes. She needed to think. She needed to think fast, and she needed to think clearly, and she needed to do both of those things while her hands were shaking. She set the tray down on the prep counter and pressed her palms flat against the steel surface and made herself breathe. Made herself go back over what she'd heard. Not the feeling of it, the fact of it. What, exactly, had Oleg said, and what had Pavel said in response, and what had she actually understood versus what had she inferred? She went through it twice. She hadn't inferred anything. The dessert cart. The honey cake. Nikolai's standing Friday order, the same thing every week. Everyone on staff knew it because Svetlana had told them all that Mr. Baranov's preferences were not to be altered or substituted under any circumstances. Honey cake. Black tea. 2 sugars. Every Friday without variation. Oleg had said the name of it in Russian, the diminutive, the way you'd say it casually to someone who already knew what you meant. The pastry chef had been handled. Those were the exact words, handled. The man who'd been making that cake for 3 years, handled. A replacement had been brought in for tonight only. The preparation of Mr. Baranov's dessert had been redirected. And if for some reason he didn't eat it, a possibility they'd acknowledged with the kind of flat professionalism that was more terrifying than any raised voice, Pavel had a secondary measure. He had said this while touching something beneath his jacket on the left side. Maya had watched enough of Nikolai Baranov's world from the edges of his restaurants to understand what a secondary measure meant when it lived in a jacket on the left side. 25 minutes. She needed help. The first person she thought of was Jordan, her coworker, not her brother, same name, different situation. Jordan Hayes, 17, been working the floor at Kasparov's for 8 months, the only other person her age in the building. He was smart, he was good, he would listen. She found him by the service station restocking bread baskets. Jordan. She kept her voice low. Steady. She did not sound steady to herself, but she made her voice do it anyway. I need you to listen to me. This is important. He looked at her face and immediately set down the bread basket. What happened? The men at table 11. Oleg and Pavel. She watched his eyes flick automatically across the dining room to the curved booth. Don't look. Don't look at them right now, just listen to me. He looked back at her. They were speaking Russian. I heard them. Something is going to happen to Mr. Baranov tonight. Before he leaves. I heard them talking about the dessert cart and I understood what they were saying and it wasn't good, Jordan. A pause. Jordan's face moved through several expressions in quick succession. She watched concern arrive and then, right behind it, the thing she'd been afraid of, the gentle, reasonable retreat of someone who was not going to get involved in something this large. Maya. You probably misheard. These guys come in every week. They work for him. That's why it matters. You're Russian, you said your mom taught you, but that was years ago, and if it was a private conversation. My Russian is perfect. She said it quietly. No anger. Just the fact. My mother was a professional translator. She taught me from birth. I didn't mishear. I didn't misunderstand. I know exactly what I heard. Jordan looked at table 11. Looked at Nikolai. Looked at his bread baskets. Maya, I can't. If I go over there and say something and it turns out to be nothing, Svetlana fires both of us tonight. And if it's not nothing, he stopped. He couldn't finish the sentence because finishing it meant admitting what the rest of it would be. These aren't regular people. I know they're not regular people. Then you know I can't help you. He picked up the bread basket. His hands weren't entirely steady either. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. But I can't. Jordan walked back to the floor. 8:53 p.m. 22 minutes. She was on her own. Svetlana ran the floor of Kasparov's with the precise efficiency of someone who had learned long ago that their continued employment depended on nothing going wrong, ever, under any circumstances. She was 51, Russian-born, had worked for Nikolai Baranov for 11 years and had the particular loyalty of someone who had been pulled out of a very bad situation by a very powerful person and had never forgotten it. Maya found her in the back office at 8:55 p.m. Svetlana. I need to tell you something and I need you to listen. Svetlana looked up from her reservation book. Looked at Maya the way she always looked at Maya, not unkindly, but with the absolute certainty of someone who had ranked all the people in this building by the weight of their words and had assigned Maya a weight somewhere near the bottom. The guests at table 11. Maya kept her voice controlled. Flat. Giving her the facts, not the fear. Oleg and Pavel. I passed their table this evening and I overheard their conversation. I speak Russian, my mother was a professional translator and she raised me in the language, and I understood what they were saying. They're planning to do something to Mr. Baranov tonight. Through the dessert service. They said the honey cake has been, that the pastry chef was replaced tonight and that the cake was prepared differently and that. She stopped because Svetlana's face had changed. Not toward concern. Toward something else. Something careful and closed and deliberately blank in the way that faces go blank when a person is deciding very quickly not to know a thing. You misunderstood, Svetlana said. I didn't. Your Russian isn't sufficient to follow a private. My mother was fluent and she taught me from birth. I understand the language as well as you do. A beat of silence. Svetlana's expression flickered. Something is going to happen tonight. The dessert cart goes out in 18 minutes. Someone needs to stop it and someone needs to tell Mr. Baranov. Maya. Svetlana's voice had gone very quiet. Not gentle. Quiet in the way that precedes something final. Those men have worked for Mr. Baranov for 6 years. They have been coming to this restaurant for 6 years. You have been here for 4 months. You are a busgirl. Each word placed carefully, like something heavy being set down. If you repeat what you've told me to anyone, to any guest, to any staff member, to Mr. Baranov, I will call your father tonight and tell him that his daughter was inventing slander about our guests. I will ensure you never work in the hospitality industry in this city again. And she held Maya's gaze. I will make sure the men at table 11 know that one of our staff members was eavesdropping on their private conversation. The room went very still. Maya understood what that last sentence meant. Svetlana understood that Maya understood it. Go back to the floor, Svetlana said. Right now. Maya went back to the floor. 8:58 p.m. 17 minutes. Drop a heart if you're already feeling this. This 16-year-old girl just got threatened by the floor manager for trying to save her boss's life. She has 17 minutes, no allies, and a dessert cart that's already being prepared in the kitchen. She speaks Russian because of her late mother, and right now the gift is the only thing standing between Nikolai Baranov and the men he trusts most. Subscribe to Korean Mafia Tales because this story is only getting started. There was a man named Drago who stood by the wall near Nikolai's table every Friday night. He was not staff. He did not wear a uniform. He stood with his hands loose at his sides and his eyes moving in slow, practiced sweeps across the dining room, and everyone on staff had learned long ago not to approach Nikolai's table without being acknowledged first. Drago was the reason. Drago and the two men who rotated with him on different nights, private security, personal, answerable only to Nikolai. Maya had never spoken to Drago. In 4 months, she had never needed to. She needed to now. She approached the edge of Nikolai's table at 9:01 p.m. 16 minutes remaining. She didn't go past the invisible line that everyone on staff understood, the perimeter, the unspoken boundary. She stopped just short of it and looked at Drago directly and kept her voice low enough that the surrounding tables couldn't hear. "I need to speak with Mr. Baranoff. It's urgent." Drago looked at her. Not the way most people in this building looked at her, through her, but at her. Assessing. He was good at his job. That was what made what happened next so much worse. No interruptions. "I understand. But this is about his safety. Please. Someone needs to." "No. Not raised. Not aggressive. Just the single syllable, placed like a wall." The men at table 11. "I heard them speaking Russian. I speak Russian." They were discussing. Something shifted in Drago's face. For 1/2 second, she thought she had him. She thought she'd found the crack. Then his expression closed again, and this time it closed differently, with something that looked like suspicion. Pointed directly at her. "What did you say?" His voice had changed register. Quiet. Deliberate. He took a half-step toward her and the movement was not violent but it was absolute. "I said I heard them speaking Russian." The men at table 11. "They said the dessert service." "Stop." He was very close to her now. Close enough that nobody across the room could read his lips or hers. "Little girl. Whatever you think you heard. Whatever you think is happening. You didn't hear anything. Do you understand me?" His eyes held hers without blinking. "You go back to your section. You finish your shift. You collect your tips. And you do not say another word about any conversation to any person in this building. Are we clear?" Maya's throat was tight. Her heart was doing something loud and uncomfortable behind her ribs. "Are we clear?" he said again. Not a question. "Yes," she said. She walked away. She felt Drago watching her back until she turned the corner. 9:03 p.m. 12 minutes. She went to the only place she could go. The staff bathroom, single occupancy, lock on the door. She turned the lock and stood at the sink and looked at herself in the mirror and tried to find the person in her reflection who knew what to do next. She looked 16. She looked tired. She looked like someone who should be at home studying calculus. She thought about leaving. Just getting her jacket from the back, walking out the service entrance, calling 911 from the sidewalk and letting the adults handle it, the police, the security, someone whose job it was to deal with things like this. She thought about that very seriously for about 15 seconds. And then she thought about what 15 seconds of that phone call would sound like. "Hi, I'm a 16-year-old girl. I work as a busgirl at a restaurant. I overheard 2 men speaking Russian and I think there's something wrong with the dessert." She thought about how far into that sentence she'd get before the voice on the other end started managing her. She thought about the dessert cart going out while she was on hold. She thought about her mother. Not dramatically. Not a vision. Just a sentence, one that Adiz Williams had said to her daughter more than once, in Russian, in the intimate dark of bedtime, in the language that nobody else in their apartment building could understand. Silence is also a choice. Her mother had said it about small things. A friend treated unfairly. A teacher who graded on bias. Small moments of injustice in the life of a child. She'd said it simply, without drama, as a statement of how the world worked and what a person's responsibility to it was. Silence is also a choice. Maya looked at herself in the mirror. She had one option left. The only person nobody had been able to put between her and Nikolai Baranov was Nikolai Baranov himself. No gatekeepers. No buffers. Just her and him and whatever she could say in the seconds before someone removed her from the building. And the thing she would say, the thing that would make him stop, the thing that would cut through every layer of his defenses and every reason he had to dismiss a 16-year-old busgirl, was the exact language she'd heard coming from his own men's mouths. Not in English. In Russian. His language. Her mother's language. 9:06 p.m. 9 minutes. One chance. She unlocked the bathroom door. She walked out of the hallway and onto the floor and didn't stop. Past the service station. Past table 4 and table 6 and the party of 8 near the window that she was supposed to clear in the next 10 minutes. Past the host stand where the maitre d' was seating a new couple and didn't have time to notice her direction. Across the open floor of the dining room with her spine straight and her face set and her entire body broadcasting something that she prayed read as belonging rather than trespassing. She crossed the invisible line around Nikolai Baranov's table. She heard Drago move behind her. She had maybe 3 seconds before his hand touched her shoulder. Nikolai Baranov looked up from his phone. His eyes were the specific shade of gray that had no warmth in it. He looked at her the way he looked at the furniture, awareness without interest. A thing in his environment that required a response. You do not approach this table. Quiet. Absolute. Mr. Baranov. 9 minutes. Please. She held his gaze. Didn't step back. I work here. I bus tables. I need 1 minute and then you can have me removed. Drago's hand closed on her arm. Nikolai held up 2 fingers without looking at him. The hand on her arm didn't release but stopped applying pressure. 1 minute, Nikolai said. His voice was not kind. It was not warm. But it was words and it was directed at her and it was the first door that had opened all night. Maya took 1 breath. Then she spoke in Russian. Not loud. Not dramatic. Low and precise, because the language demanded precision and because her mother had raised her to respect it. The men at table 11 told each other tonight that the honey cake has been prepared by a replacement. That the regular pastry chef was handled. That after the dessert service, when you eat your Friday order, something will happen. And that if it doesn't work, Pavel has a secondary measure underneath his jacket on the left side. Total silence. Drago had stopped moving entirely. Nikolai Baranov's face had gone somewhere between expression and the complete absence of it, a man whose features were working very hard in a direction Maya couldn't read, who was looking at her with a quality of attention that was nothing like the way he'd looked at her 30 seconds ago. He was looking at her the way you look at something that has just rewritten the rules of the room you're standing in. Where did you learn to speak Russian? His voice was identical in volume and tone to what it had been. Nothing had changed in its surface. Everything had changed in what it was carrying. My mother. She was a linguist. American by birth. Russian by devotion. She raised me in the language. A pause. She died 18 months ago. Something moved in Nikolai Baranov's face. Very small. There and gone. What is your name? Maya. Maya Williams. I bus tables here on weekday evenings. How long have you been hearing this conversation? Since 8:49. I tried Svetlana. I tried your security. She glanced at Drago, who was now watching her with an entirely different expression. Nobody listened. I have been trying to reach you for 17 minutes. Nikolai Baranov was quiet for 3 seconds. Then he looked across the dining room at table 11. At Oleg. At Pavel. Who were sitting in their curved booth, watching the exchange with the particular stillness of people who have just watched a plan begin to unravel and are not yet sure how far to let it go. He looked at the kitchen door. He looked at the clock above the bar. 9:08 p.m. He picked up his phone and sent a text with 2 words in it that Maya could not see. Looked up at Drago. Spoke in Russian, quietly. The dessert cart does not leave the kitchen. Drago moved immediately, not toward table 11, toward the kitchen, smooth and unhurried, a man going about ordinary business. Then Nikolai Baranov looked at Maya and said, "Sit down." She sat down. She had been on her feet for 5 hours and she didn't notice until she was off them. 3 men she had never seen before entered through the service corridor at 9:09 p.m. They did not come in through the front door. They did not look like restaurant staff. They moved to specific positions in the room with the coordination of people who had received a message and responded to it, and within 60 seconds of their arrival the geometry of Kasparov's grill had completely changed. Oleg saw it first. She watched him see it, the recognition moving across his face like weather, the assessment of options, the calculation. He put his hand on the table, palm flat. Looked at Pavel. Pavel looked at the 3 men and then at Drago coming back from the kitchen direction and then at the position of the exits, and she could see him doing the mathematics of it, the cold professional arithmetic of a plan that had been measured against a situation and found to be short. His hand moved toward his jacket. "Don't." Nikolai had not raised his voice, had not moved from his chair. But the word traveled across the room with the specific authority of someone who understood exactly how much force a single syllable could carry when the room was arranged correctly around it. Pavel's hand stopped. "You have one option," Nikolai said, still in Russian, still from his chair, still at the same conversational volume he used to discuss his Friday order. "You sit. You wait. You answer questions. That's it. There is no other version of tonight that ends differently for you than that one." A pause. "Move in any other direction and every option closes." Pavel's hand came away from his jacket. The 3 men closed in quietly. 9:12 p.m. The dessert cart stayed in the kitchen. Drop a heart if that confrontation had you holding your breath. A 16-year-old girl sat down across from a Mafia boss and spoke Russian to his face, and it saved his life. Smash that like button and subscribe to Korean Mafia Tales, because what happens next is about to change everything for Maya. The bomb hasn't been confirmed yet, and Nikolai Baranov is a man who trusts no one. We're not done. The restaurant was quietly, efficiently cleared. Not with panic. Not with visible alarm. With the particular professionalism of a world that had protocols for this kind of thing and applied them the way surgeons applied procedure, calmly, in sequence, because panic is the enemy of outcomes. The guests were thanked for their patronage and informed of a private event requiring the space. The staff were sent home. Oleg and Pavel were escorted, with meticulous civility, to a room in the back that Maya had never known existed. By 9:25 p.m., Kasparov's grill was empty except for Nikolai Baranov, Maya Williams, Drago, the 3 new men, and Svetlana, who sat in a chair near the host stand looking at her hands and not at anyone. The dessert cart had been examined. The man who examined it came to Nikolai's table at 9:31 p.m. with the specific posture of someone carrying information they wished they weren't carrying. He spoke quietly in Russian and Maya understood every word. The honey cake contained a compound. He named it in a way that told her he knew what he was talking about, that in sufficient quantity would cause cardiac symptoms indistinguishable from natural arrhythmia in a man with Nikolai Baranov's documented medical profile. His medical profile, which his own organization had access to. The regular pastry chef, a man named Georgi who had worked here for 3 years, had been detained at his apartment that evening and was unharmed. A substitute had been brought in for the single purpose of this preparation. It had been elegant, Drago said, with something grim in his voice. Planned by people who knew the restaurant, knew the routines, knew the man. Nikolai had listened to all of this without changing his expression. When it was finished, he sat for a moment with his hands flat on the table the way a man sits when he is deciding something about his own life. Then he looked at Maya. She was still sitting across from him. She had not been asked to leave and she had not left. Drago had brought her water at some point and she had drunk it. "You have been working here 4 months, Nikolai said. "Yes. In 4 months, you observed my Friday routine. You knew my standing dessert order. Everyone on staff knew your order. Svetlana briefed us. And when you understood what you were hearing, your first response was not to call the police and leave the building. I thought about it. She said it plainly. I was worried about how long it would take. The dessert service was 17 minutes away. You tried 3 people before you came to me. Yes. Who discouraged you? Jordan said he couldn't risk it. Svetlana threatened to have me dismissed and told the men at table 11 that I'd been listening. She paused. Drago told me I hadn't heard anything. Drago, standing to the side, had the expression of a man doing a thorough audit of the evening's decisions. And you came anyway, Nikolai said. I didn't have another option. You had the option of leaving. He said it not as an accusation but as a genuine observation. Most people would have left. You had nothing to gain by staying. Maya looked at the table. Thought about how to say the thing she was thinking. Decided to say it the way her mother would have said it, directly, without performance. My mother used to say that silence is also a choice. She wasn't talking about situations like this. She was talking about small things. Ordinary unfairness. She looked up. But I don't think she would have said it differently tonight. Nikolai Baranov was quiet for a long time. The restaurant was empty around them. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Buckhead continued its wealthy, indifferent Friday night. Cars moved between pools of streetlight. The city didn't know. The city never knew. How old are you? He said. 16. Another silence. Longer. Your mother was a linguist. She taught at Georgia State. Russian and English linguistics. She died from a fast-moving cancer 18 months ago. My father works construction. My brother has asthma. I took this job to help with the medical costs. She said it matter-of-factly. Not asking for sympathy. Just answering the question he hadn't asked but that she understood was underneath the one he had. Nikolai looked at her for a long moment with an expression she couldn't fully read, the expression of a man who has spent many years training himself not to be moved by things and is encountering, without warning, something that has moved him anyway. I walked past you for 4 months, he said. Yes. I didn't know your name. Most guests don't know the busgirl's name. I own this restaurant. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. He knew what he was saying. The men who tried to end me tonight, he said, worked for me for 6 years. I knew their names. I knew their histories. I paid their salaries and their bonuses, and I trusted them in the specific, calculated way that I trust people I cannot afford to fully trust. A pause. And a 16-year-old girl clearing tables knew more tonight about what was happening in my own restaurant than I did. He said this without self-pity. Without drama. As a man accounting for something. You speak Russian because your mother taught you. Yes. She taught you a language that nobody expected you to speak. In a restaurant full of people who assumed they couldn't be understood. She taught me that communication belongs to whoever learns it. Not to whoever was born to it. Something very small shifted in Nikolai Baranov's face. Not a smile. Something quieter than a smile. Something that had to do with recognition. 3 days later, Maya and her father sat across from Nikolai Baranov in his office on the 22nd floor of a building in Midtown that Maya had walked past many times without knowing who owned it. Her father was a large man who carried himself with the particular dignity of someone who had built everything he had through his own labor and was not accustomed to sitting in offices like this one. He held his hands in his lap and he listened. Nikolai spoke directly. He had, he said, done some research. He described it as standard practice, the way you'd describe any professional due diligence, but they understood it for what it was. He knew about Devon's inhaler. He knew about the electricity bill. He knew about Maya's scholarship application to the Emory Pre-University STEM Pathway, a competitive program she had been invited to apply for by her school counselor, a program whose costs were significant enough that it had been, until now, theoretical. He placed a folder on the desk. The program's tuition. Housing and transportation. Books and materials. Covered in full. Her brother's medical costs, insurance, medications, specialist visits, covered for 5 years. A. Trust established in Maya's name, accessible at 18, sufficient to fund a university education without debt. Her father looked at the folder for a long time. Mr. Baranoff, he said, we can't accept. With respect, Nikolai said, you can. And you will. He said it without pressure. With the calm certainty of someone who has thought this through and arrived at a conclusion they are not going to revisit. Your daughter saved my life. She did it without being asked, without expecting anything, after 3 people actively discouraged her and one of them threatened her. She did it at personal risk. He looked at Maya. That is a debt I cannot fully settle. But I can try. Maya looked at the folder. Thought about her mother. About the language she'd left behind. About the gift that had, on a Friday night in a Buckhead restaurant, turned out to be the most important thing anyone had ever given her. Mr. Baranoff, she said. Can I ask you something? Yes. Why does it matter to you that I didn't expect anything? That's just what you do. When something is wrong and you can fix it, you try to fix it. That's not special. Nikolai looked at her for a moment. You'd be surprised, he said quietly, how rare that is. Her father reached across the table and took her hand. She let him. My mother used to say that kindness is not weakness, Maya said. She said it in Russian, actually. I used to think it was just something mothers said. It's not, Nikolai said. No, she agreed. I don't think it is. 6 months later, Maya Williams sat in a first-floor classroom at Emory University's Rollins School building, which was not where the pre-university program actually met, but which was close enough to the campus that she walked through it on her way in every morning, and every morning she felt the specific, grounded reality of being somewhere she had earned through the combination of her own ability and her mother's most enduring gift. She was first in her cohort in molecular biology. 3rd overall in mathematics. She had, on 2 occasions, tutored other students in Russian, one of them the daughter of a diplomat who had assumed, upon meeting Maya, that her Russian would be academic and textbook formal. She had been corrected. Maya's Russian was the Russian of bedtime stories and whispered jokes and the intimate frequency of a mother who had wanted her daughter to carry something that couldn't be taken away. She thought about that sometimes. What it meant that the thing her mother had given her, not a house, not money, not connections, just a language, just a way of hearing the world that other people couldn't share, had been the exact thing that mattered most when the night required it. She thought about Nikolai Baranoff, who was, by all available evidence, a different man than the one who had sat in the gray suit at table 4 every Friday without knowing the name of anyone who cleared his plates. She heard this indirectly, through Jordan, who had kept his job at Kasparov's and reported that the restaurant had changed in specific and observable ways, that the staff were addressed by name now, that the floor manager had been replaced, that the Friday routine had been altered and the new security team moved differently through the space, with the particular alertness of people who had been trained to see what they hadn't been trained to see before. She heard it directly, once. A text from an unknown number, 6 weeks after the night at Kasparov's, that turned out to be from Nikolai himself. It said only, your brother's prescription renewal has been arranged. You will not receive another bill. NB. She had stared at the text for a long time. Then she had typed back, in Russian, my mother would have liked you. She had a weakness for people who were capable of changing their minds. The response had come 4 hours later. 3 words. Also in Russian. Give her my regards. 1 year after the night at Kasparov's Grill, Nikolai Baranoff sat in his midtown office with the window behind him showing Atlanta in the particular gold of a late afternoon in October. On his desk, between a stack of property reports and a legal folder, was a photograph in a plain frame. He had it made from a security still, slightly grainy, taken from the dining room camera at 9:07 p.m. on the Friday in question. It showed the dining room from above and at an angle, the tables in their Friday arrangement, and in the lower left corner, barely in frame, a girl in a white-collared uniform standing at the edge of an invisible line, looking directly at a man in a gray suit who had not yet looked up from his phone. The moment before everything. His assistant knocked. "Sir, the call with Chicago is confirmed for 4 o'clock. Thank you." He didn't look up from the photograph. The assistant hesitated. She had been with him for 8 months, the new team, the rebuilt team, and she had noticed the photograph before but had never asked about it. "Is there anything else you need before the call?" He thought about it. "No," he said. "I have everything I need." She left. He looked at the photograph. He had spent more than 2 decades building something formidable. Security systems, loyalty structures, redundancies and contingencies, and the particular architecture of a man who trusts no one because he has learned, at great cost, that trust is where catastrophe enters. And the catastrophe had come anyway. Through the people he'd trusted. Through the routines he'd used to make himself feel certain. Through the very predictability he'd mistaken for control. And it had been stopped by someone he'd walked past for 4 months without learning her name. Someone 16 years old with worn non-slip shoes and a water pitcher and a dead mother's voice in her head and the simple, unargued conviction that staying silent was not acceptable. He thought about what that meant. He had been thinking about it for a year and he was still not finished. It meant that the systems you build to protect yourself are only as good as your understanding of where the threat actually lives. He'd understood threats as things that came from outside, from rivals, from the dark operations of people who wanted what he'd built. He had not understood, had failed, across decades of experience, to understand that the most dangerous blindness is the kind you choose. The kind where you stop seeing people as people and start seeing them as the role they fill and the function they serve and the category they belong to. Busgirl. Street kid. Invisible. He looked at the photograph. She had not been invisible. He had simply chosen not to see her. He picked up his phone and sent a message to the program coordinator at Emory, a contact he had established after the first conversation, one he checked in with quarterly. The message asked for an update on her progress. The response came back in 7 minutes. Top of the cohort. She's been asked to participate in a summer research placement at the School of Public Health. We've never had a pre-university student offered that before. She's remarkable. He read it twice. Set his phone down. Outside, Atlanta moved through its October afternoon entirely unaware of the Friday night 11 months ago when a 16-year-old girl in a white uniform had stood at an invisible line and refused, against every adult in the building, against every reasonable calculation of risk and self-preservation, to stay silent. Nikolai Baranov, who had built an empire on the premise that the world was composed of threats and tools and that warmth was a vulnerability a person in his position could not afford, was slowly, imperfectly, with the awkward determination of a man learning something fundamental very late, becoming someone else. He kept the photograph on his desk to remind himself of what it had cost him not to see. And what it had given him, in the end, to finally learn how. Silence is also a choice. So is looking. So is changing. From invisible busgirl to the reason a Mafia boss keeps a photograph on his desk, drop a heart if this story moved you. Maya spoke Russian because her mother gave it to her. She used it on a Friday night when 17 minutes stood between a powerful man and the end of his life. Every adult in that building dismissed her. She tried anyway. 3 times. Then once more after that. Nikolai Baranov had spent 20 years trusting no one. The person who saved him was the one he'd never thought to trust, the one he'd never thought to see. What was your favorite moment? Her crossing the invisible line and speaking Russian to his face? The 3 words he texted her a month later? The photograph on the desk? Comment below. Have you ever been dismissed when you knew you were right? Have you ever had to be loud just to be heard? Share your story. Smash that like button and subscribe to Korean Mafia Tales for stories about courage, transformation, and the people who prove that the smallest voice in the room sometimes carries the truth that saves everyone in it. Sometimes the most powerful thing in a building is the person nobody's looking at.